great, felt super prepared, went out, pretty quickly raised money. And yeah, and then like had a theory of the case, had a business idea, had secured some unpaid pilots, but some real pilots, built an MVP, and then proceeded to get punched in the face for a couple of years when it like didn't work and didn't work on a variety of different levels. And so that sucked, and it kind of forced me to go back to the drawing board of like, what do I know? Is it that I'm incompetent? Is it that I have just like the wrong way of thinking about this stage? Is it a mix of the two? And then what happened is we went like a Hail Mary pivot, went 0 to 4 million ARR in 2 years. And it just broke my brain on what actually matters.
That's Rob Snyder. We recorded this episode a couple of months back, but I wanted to save this for my last episode of our Demystifying Product Coaching series because, well, it's different. Rob is not a product manager. In fact, he probably couldn't tell you that much about what a product manager does, but you should listen to him anyway. This is a must-listen episode for any PMs or founders, especially those using AI, agentic coding, or vibe coding to quickly build concepts and now need to think about finding product market fit. Even if you're an experienced PM, you're bound to expand your aperture and understanding of the path to PMF with this episode. Additionally, for those of you following along on YouTube, you'll notice there's something different with this episode. We had an error in our recording, so we turned this into an audio-only episode. No changes for any of you on any of the audio podcast platforms, but something a little bit different for those of you following along on YouTube. We hope you enjoy. But first, a word from our sponsor.
What if your top salesperson was 1,000 times more efficient? And what if a limitless digital workforce helped your number one find leads? A super team working 24/7 on their behalf, thinking, acting, and solving complex tasks so more deals closed. That would be one very efficient sales leader. Now, imagine if every person on your team worked to the power of 1,000. They can with Agentforce, the powerful AI from Salesforce. Learn more at salesforce.com.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. I'm really excited for today's guest, Rob Snyder. Rob is a two-time founder who he learned more about product market fit, wading his way through what he calls the pain cave, doing the laps, putting in the reps, perhaps learn more relative to when he was at Harvard Business School or McKinsey, and has put together a really interesting approach for how to find product market fit, and is currently a fellow at Harvard Innovation Lab. Welcome to the podcast today, Rob.
Thank you for having me.
We're very excited to have you. I know that you're a new father. How's that going?
Yeah, so it's going great. I am half delirious, so we will. If anything I say doesn't make sense, it is not the listener. It is not you. It is 100% me.
It's a whole nother kind of product, right? Like it being a dad, and then here's this child. How am I helping shape that? I'm really pumped to have you on the podcast today because we've done this series on product management coaching, right? Which for product management leaders, and we've had people like Marty Kagan come on, for example, and they're working with large enterprise companies and how to lead product in the context of a company at scale. And I find there's something so unique about really leading product at that early stage of a company in that 0 to 1 part of the journey. And you offer boot camps and a newsletter and work with founders in a coaching kind of capacity. And so I'm really excited to have you on because I think it's especially timely, right? We see that, well, first of all, a lot of early stage founders are not product people, right? Or typically have, traditional product management experience. They're entrepreneurs that maybe do a lot of sales or focus on marketing or other components of the business. And yet they are all wearing a product hat in a way, right? To find that product market fit. So I think that's a reality that's been in place for a while. And I think the added new information here is, okay, well, now we have AI tools and other things that are really accelerating the pace of concept development and innovation. And while those tools exist, I don't think that they help people necessarily escape what we'll call, quote, the pain cave, as you stated it. So nonetheless, we'll get into more detail there. I'd love to open the floor to you to give a little bit of a background on your story, your context, and how you've gotten to where you are today in your career.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, did not expect to be here. I started at McKinsey. It was an awesome 2 years, beat business into me. Then I went to HBS and spent all my time there. I kind of got the startup bug. I don't remember how, but I always kind of wanted to do my own thing. And so yeah, out of HBS, I took all the entrepreneurship classes I could find. It was great. Felt super prepared. Went out pretty quickly, raised money. And yeah, and then like had a theory of the case, had a business idea, had secured some unpaid pilots, but some real pilots, built an MVP, and then proceeded to get punched in the face for a couple of years when it like didn't work, and didn't work on a variety of different levels. And so that sucked, and it kind of forced me to go back to the drawing board of like, what do I know? Is it that I'm incompetent? Is it that I have just like the wrong way of thinking about this stage? Is it a mix of the two? And then what happened is we went like a Hail Mary pivot, went 0 to 4 million ARR in 2 years. And it just broke my brain on what actually matters when, I had customers like calling me and saying, hey, I heard about your product. How do I pay for it? And also, what does it do? Right. And in that order, which is just like a weird set of things. And so I've just basically gotten really interested in that. Found like nobody has really dug into this neck of the woods and into this. It's just like a very complex topic, a very interesting topic, but it's one that you can like very easily over intellectualize and come up with things that sound right. And so I am digging into like, how does it work in practice as I do this with a bunch of teams, bring a bunch of companies from 0 to 1 million ARR, and do this for like stuff that I'm bootstrapping as well now. So that's a little pun of history.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you figured out like what it is that you were doing, right, in order to find product market fit, there are the things that you did that you'd learned perhaps at HBS or McKinsey or through other consumption, right? All consuming stuff all day long on startup life and innovation. But what wasn't working from that? And then what did you find started to click as you started to think about, oh, it's not by accident that I got to 0 to 4 million ARR in this period of time. Like there were some reps that you were doing that got you to that point, right? Can you compare and contrast that a little bit for us?
Yeah, so I would like now looking back on it, I look at it as the first kind of 2 years in hell. I was building a business that made logical sense. There was a gap in the market.
Yeah.
There was a huge market opportunity. People did have pain points with the status quo, right? Like check every single box there. In like all of those things made sense and led to a product direction that made sense, a product roadmap that made sense. Everything except for the most important thing, like the only thing that actually winds up mattering. And so what I realized was there's one thing that matters, and it is when customers experience your product, or when they hear about it, when they see it, whatever it is, do they pull? Do they actually have demand for it? Does a single person actually pull the product out of you? The first 2 years, I did everything but figure that out. The second 2 years, I almost exclusively focused on that. And by exclusively focusing on that, everything downstream solved itself. By focusing on everything downstream, I came up with something that made a ton of sense in theory and didn't work in practice.
Yeah. So, and I love that the check the box, right? Because we can intellectualize and we have all these other frameworks, right? And so we're like, oh, look at how neatly I can fit this into the lean canvas or whatever the framework is. And it sounds like you were trying all those things. Then when you have this concept of supply and demand, and I think you said like somebody's pulling something out of you. Can you explain that a little bit more? Like, what does that mean for, right? Because just because somebody's in pain, I mean, I'll joke, right? So my husband's back hurts and I keep joking, you should go to the doctor. And he said, oh, I'm just going to work out and I'll be fine. Right.
That is literally my whole last week. That's exactly me. Yes.
Like, we are very adept as humans at tolerating pain, right? And I was telling a joke with somebody about Jira, right? The app for tracking project management and your tickets and a part of Atlassian. And there is a IBleepHateJira.com website, right? Where everybody hates it, but they still use it because it's solving a problem. And, the pain does the pain outweigh other priorities that are happening, right? So I think you have a really interesting reframe on this with supply and demand. I'd love for you to expand on that a little bit.
Yeah. If you can separate the world into two different kind of domains, there is the supply domain and there is the demand domain. Supply, and I got this from Ryan Singer, actually, guy behind Shape Up, right? Supply is the stuff you make. That's your product. That's your marketing, that's your messaging, that's your value prop, it's all of that. Demand, you don't control. It's out there in the world. And demand is like, what are people trying to do? What are they trying to accomplish? What progress are they trying to make in their lives? What options do they consider as they try to make those options? Now, demand exists as an independent thing. It exists whether or not your business exists. And it makes your supply relevant, or in most cases, not. And so it's upstream as a concept. Demand is upstream of supply. And so what we tend to think is that, okay, I'm going to make a product and I'm going to validate that it fits a pain point that people have. And if I can get somebody to say in a discovery interview that they have pain points as it relates to this, cool, I've validated demand. That's not quite it. What we're looking for is somebody trying to change and they have bad options that they perceive to be bad options. And if we fit our supply into that space, do they pull? Do they buy it? Do they want the next step? If they don't, it's just talk. It's just them complaining. And then you just wind up suffering until you find somebody who's trying to change.
I think that's so important. I was speaking with a founder recently who, said, and here are the macroeconomic studies that show that this is a big problem and that financial institutions are all dealing with this problem. And this is the size of it and how it's grown year over year. And we can solve that problem. And I said, that's this problem here. But what are the other problems ahead of it in line and behind it in line? And if it's not 1, 2, or maybe 3, then maybe it doesn't have the urgency, even if it's a big problem, right? It's like the urgency of the problem.
Yeah, actually, I love that because basically, I always hear a very similar thing, which is this is an objectively big problem for the industry, right? And it's like, cool, that doesn't mean anything. And what happens in that case is you get on a sales call with somebody, they agree that it is a massive problem for the industry. They agree that they have pain points. They think your solution is fascinating, and then they ghost you and don't buy. And you're left scratching your head because you're kind of like talking about things at this abstract macro level.
Right.
They have an Asana board. They have a Trello board of shit they have to get done. And like, this isn't on that list. So it would be weird if they heard what you're doing and said, you know what? Let me do this. I'm going to just delete my Trello board and buy your product. Right? Like, that's never going to happen.
Yeah.
And so what you have to do is you have to fit into their Trello board, onto their to-do list.
Right.
Versus trying to like push your product on them and saying, doesn't this solve your problems and pain points?
I mean, then it's a question for founders to think, how am I going to find what those urgent things, the projects that are the top three? I think with one founder I worked with, we said, oh, we need to stop looking here. We need to go look over here because regulatory advancements are happening at a faster pace, which are creating the urgency, right? And so, completely shifted target continents, right? And the regulation feels like one area where you can do that. But how do you uncover and discover what those urgent things are for people to solve?
Yeah, I think the first step is to actually look for it. So like what will typically happen on a discovery call or a sales call is you show up, you ask them questions about their current state and their pain points.
Yeah.
You can learn everything about that and know nothing about demand. So it's like you can just ask people. This is language that you can say and they will like understand it. What are the projects you're trying to get done right now? What are the options you're considering? And what's missing?
Mm-hmm.
And if you just figure that out, like what are they actually trying to do? You can observe them at work, see what they're doing, see how they're prioritizing, see what options they're using, considering, and like see where you could fit into that world. That's where it emerges if you look for it. And then yes, you can zoom out. I like looking at the individual level because demand only exists at the individual level. Like a company can't buy your product, a niche can't buy your product, a persona can't buy your product, a person can. And that repeats. And so I have to find it at the individual level, and then I can kind of like zoom out and say, okay, what are the general trends that support this? But I tend to start at the individual level, not the kind of zoomed out abstract level, because that's just too easy to lie to yourself there.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's really potent, that the idea that it's the individual. And so you have to be able to understand the context and their motivators. And specifically, you said you do discovery. And I know that, first of all, there's a really great deck that we'll make sure we link to that Rob has made available. It's this 90-slide deck of his approach to how he does things. And I think in there's this kind of commentary around discovery, right, as a whole. And as a product person and someone who's in product marketing, of course, I have an attachment to the exercise of discovery. And I think what I'd love to hear you share a little bit more about your point of view on that, where there are like pitfalls and some booby traps in how people do discovery. And then like where you see it done right, which I think you started to hint to a little bit in your last answer. But it's not that you're saying there shouldn't be discovery, right? It's like discovery is a very important part of the founder journey. It's just like taking a certain angle on it, I think, right?
Yeah. It's like discovery is a useful tool if one, you know what you're looking for, aka like you're not looking for pain points in current situation. You're looking for what are they trying to change? What are they trying to do different? And two, you validate that you've learned something real by trying to put a dollar sign at the end of the discovery. And so this is specifically for startups. There are reasons you would do product discovery differently later on when you have existing, yada, yada, yada. For startups, it's like, okay, do I know what I'm looking for? And two, will they, based on what I hear, what I think demand is, will they pay me at the end of it? Because if they won't pay you, then you're not sure what you have learned. And you might have learned some fake stuff.
Right.
If they do pay you, money talks. Money proves that that you've learned something. And so that's why I kind of advocate for sales as a method of early stage discovery. And not because I have any particular fondness for sales or I'm particularly good at sales, but because it's the best way, in my view, to learn what's real versus what isn't.
Right. I mean, that's the best signal of finding that urgency, right? Like that this is something that it's not far down the Trello list or a post-it way down the board, right? It's right up there. And when you say like to do discovery and ask about pain points, right? I think there's so many different types of customer discovery. And there's evaluative discovery, which maybe is something that you can do once you have a big product in place and you're trying to optimize it. And then there's this concept of like generative discovery, which I think can also be used probably farther in more large companies, and it is used. But it's like, that's what's especially important, I think, in that early stage startup environment is, not asking somebody, what are your pain points, but like having them tell you, when was the last time that you tried to do X? Because if it's something that they've been trying to do for the last 3 months and they have pain points that'll naturally come out in that story, then you're really discovering something that maybe leads you more to an understanding of that urgency. Is that like that approach on that generative discovery make sense?
Yeah, I'd say that's like 40 IQ points higher than anything I've ever like worked on. So my approach is a little, my theory on it is a little dumber, which is just like ask them about what they're trying to do and what's missing, and then like if all else fails, say, what would you pay me to help you solve?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that's the great question to ask. I mean, I think in discovery, right? And we had Teresa Torres on this podcast as well, right? And she's just like, don't ask people what would they do, right? Ask them what they have done. Because if you get real stories, it's like just the anthropology, right? Approach of observing people in the wild, so to speak. And then when you observe, you have to like then distill and like learn, oh, wow, they really tripped over that thing or whatever. And this is still really important. They're trying to do it. So I think when people hear about like focus groups or founders ready to hear about that, and it's like and I've worked with a founder recently who said, well, don't we just ask them what they want to pay us for? Right. Which, I mean, I think it's important to ask if they will pay at some point, obviously, but this just gets back to the idea of Henry Ford and faster horses, right? If you ask them what they wanted, they might have said faster.
Yeah, you want to ask questions on the demand side of the world, not on the supply side of the world. And you ideally want to ask them questions about the past, not the future on the demand side.
Yeah. You have some interesting points of view on pivots as well. And I think especially, in our current environment, there's so much shifting and changing. Can you share a little bit more about what it means to you for a startup that's in a pre-product market fit stage to decide, okay, we're going to pivot now? Like what's your take on that?
Yeah, so my general experience with pivots is that the concept, like basically everything in the lean startup is super helpful and like grossly misapplied. And so the concept of a pivot makes a ton of sense. But the way startups tend to do it is they tend to be like, all right, what we're doing right now isn't working. Let's go hit the whiteboard and start from scratch. And it's like, the whiteboard's what got you to something that didn't work in the first place. So don't do that. What I've seen is an idea of like unfolding is a kind of more accurate representation of what a pivot is, where it is, okay, up until now, we've had 50 conversations with potential customers. We've gotten like 1 or 2 customers and they're kind of lukewarm. And here's what we've heard to date. Given all of the stuff that we've done right now, what's the thing that we want to kind of evolve? Whether it's like, okay, I was talking to this kind of person, but I did get a signal from this other kind of person. Maybe we change who we're targeting slightly. And like that kind of like changes the entire business. But I think of it more as like compounding versus going back to the whiteboard.
Yeah. And I think the going back to the whiteboard can feel a bit like a Hail Mary at the end of the day. But when you have X months of burn left and you're trying to figure out what to do, how do you, if you were on the wrong track and you were just like, working towards a problem that didn't have that right level of urgency, how do you know how far out to zoom?
Yeah, I'd say like where I tend to go for the source of truth on this is to just go and watch the recorded customer sales conversations.
Yeah.
Because it is almost always, there's almost always hints in those about what is demand really, what is relevant to them, what isn't relevant to them, why, and like how are they thinking about it. And like you tend to go and hear them say something like, oh yeah, this is really interesting, but once I'm done with this other thing, this might be worth looking into, right? This other thing is what they're prioritizing. Okay, I hear that like 4 different times. maybe we double click into that piece.
Mm.
Yeah, it does. Going to the whiteboard is what I call LARPing. And which, if you're not familiar, it's live action role playing. It's like when you go into the woods with swords and pretend to have a fake battle.
Yeah.
We do a lot of that. It's the kind of thing that feels productive, but like a business is really complex as a thing. You have a ton of information out of customers' mouths and out of their experiences so far. And so thinking that you can just go and intellectually solve it on a whiteboard is just weapons grade LARPing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you could go to do like a 1-day workshop though, right? To like explore. And that's like, you're still trying, maybe the inputs need to be, what are we getting from these conversations, right?
Yes.
It's really just a matter of how are you standing on top of the learnings that you have to date versus throwing out the baby with the bathwater, I guess.
Right. Yeah. Going back to scratch.
Yeah. One of the things that, when I first learned about you is through a recommendation to follow you on Substack to your newsletter. And I've had this bias, I think, throughout my whole career, because I've worked in different stages of startups, but certainly startups where there was a tension between what I'll call sales and product, right? Where sales was, their incentives are to hit certain quarterly targets and to grow. And depending upon the guardrails on that, right, that can either be really synergistic with your product strategy that's going to help you like conquer a market, or it can derail your product strategy depending on the approach, right? And so when I heard about this concept of like founder sales led, I had to really kind of my disbelief and say, let me get curious about this. And I did, and I dove in, and I really love it, right? Like, I just love this idea that at the end of the day, you need to be selling something to have a viable business. And that's like a really fine line to walk, right? And of course, I think early stage versus later stage startup, it plays a role there a little bit. But is that something that you found like in your work with founders, like people are trying to sell everything versus, converge on something?
Yeah, what I've actually seen is that most founders tend to avoid sales because they view it as beneath them, pushy, uncomfortable, the thing you hire people to do once you get the product right. Like, there's a ton of reasons why founders avoid sales. And so when they finally kind of are forced to do it by some reason or another, they just have their mind totally backwards about it and think it's about product demos, it's about pitching, it's about all this stuff. I view sales as the most effective way to learn what you should be building and what customers really value and what the product should be. And so actually what I've seen is this: founders go super narrow to pitch the product they envision the customer should want, versus trying to figure out what's on the customer's to-do list and what could we offer that would fit into that. And so I think it actually often goes in the other direction, where it's like super narrow, pitching a value prop, and when it doesn't resonate, we don't really learn why it doesn't resonate.
Yeah, and it's important to be able to get those. I guess when I hear about, for example, like work with founders that are sales founders, and when you get in the focus of selling, sometimes it can be about that narrow pitch, right? Like, here's my concept, here's my solution, here are all the bells and whistles that should really make you want it. Don't you want it, right? And like how does one approach a sales conversation that weaves in the right amount of discovery?
Yeah, so I would argue that you should never be pushing a sales call. And like, most people just have this intuition about sales that it's about pitching our bells and whistles, our benefits, and yada yada. Like, eventually, when you're at like 100 million ARR, you have a bunch of reps who all have very small carved up territories of people who kind of don't want to buy, but you need to hit a revenue target, right? Okay, fine. That's when they push really hard. In the early stage, it's about finding somebody who needs no convincing rather than convincing. And so the kind of Yeah, so I tend to think that most people just have their heads totally backwards on what is sales and what does a sales call feel like. It should never feel like I'm on this side of the table, you're on that side of the table, and I'm trying to twist your arm to get you to want this. It's a sign you're just doing it wrong, right? Instead, it should feel like we're on the same side of the table, looking at your to-do list and me saying, oh, that's interesting. This other customer had a similar project on their to-do list, and here's how we help them. Is that kind of how you're thinking about it? Right. And so that is a way more weighted towards discovery. There's almost no product demo in it. You might have like a 30-second to 2-minute product demo in a sales call like that. But it's not the focus. Like the primary focus of sales generally is discovery, because when you figure out what the project is that they're trying to accomplish, what the initiative is, what the thing is that they don't have good ways to accomplish, and you might be able to help them, that thing is what's going to get the deal done, not you.
I really love that. The idea that you're both sitting on the same side of the table, trying to solve a similar problem. And so when you're working with founders, maybe we can pivot into this part of the conversation, right? So you have this newsletter that you started, and then in addition to that, you run a boot camp working with founders that are searching for product market fit. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that boot camp is? And I don't know if you have any stories from the field that you can share that help illustrate a little bit more of like everything that we've been talking to and bring it to life a little bit.
Yeah, totally. So what the boot camp does, startups will come to the boot camp and they will either share their own sales calls or they'll just watch other people's sales calls. And what we'll do is we'll break down a sales call and say, okay, what is there actually pull here? What are we seeing in like, what's going on in this call room? What should we be pitching? What should our product offering be as a result of it? And you kind of go through the entire sales process through that. And so example, company comes in, it's like a kind of project management tool for nonprofits. They come in, they have a sales call that feels like a good sales call, but the person ghosts afterwards. And so we're all looking at this sales call. And what we realize is it's a very nice call. The person's like, yeah, we've been kind of struggling with our CRM for years. And, finally looking into it now that we have, now that we need to raise money from funders, our kind of CRM's our reporting's just not cutting it. Okay, like that's what you hear from the customer. And the founder goes and pitches their CRM tool and all of its functionality. And it's like, oh, wow, I get it. It sounds really interesting. And then they ghost. Well, what we find is we analyze what the customer said, which is basically, I've been in pain for 2 years, but I need to change now because of reporting, because our reporting isn't cutting it for funding. So what is the project? The question we all kind of like wrestle with, that kind of scenarios. What's the project that's actually on that person's to-do list? It's not, I want to swap out my CRM. That's like
huge.
That's huge.
High risk projects.
yeah, huge. And so they see it and then they're just like, oh my gosh, it just creates this massive project on their to-do list. They don't really want it. Their project is actually, I want better reporting for fundraising.
Yeah.
And I want the fastest way to get to that. And so when you change the kind of pitch there, which changes what the product kind of needs to emphasize or potentially be. And then the whole business changes and you found real pull. You found what the customer is actually trying to accomplish. And then you can pitch something that's like a aerodynamic fit for the move they're trying to make.
Yeah. That's such a great example. And you also offer coaching, like that's a little bit more bespoke or hands-on coaching as well, right? So you have the boot camp and then you have more one-on-one time with founders. And I would just be curious, like in that context for that coaching, aside from the frameworks that you're bringing to the table, right? Mm-hmm. And such, like what do you find are the most kind of potent moments in some of those conversations for founders as they're navigating this period? I think you got into one, which was like, people don't like to do sales, right? But what's something that you can share that some of our audience might relate to, be like, yeah, that really strikes a chord, right? In terms of their mindset, or what are you finding?
Yeah, so I think the thing that people most find useful is when I'm analyzing their calls with them and helping them pull out the pieces of demand and reshape their pitch around it. So I just got off of a call with a great team. They've gone from kind of like 0 to 3 customers in the last like month or two, but it still feels slow and kind of clunky. And it doesn't feel, they have conversations with people who are like, wow, I totally get this. Feels like something I'm going to do in like September or October.
Mhm.
Right. And so it's like, okay, what's actually happening there? Let's double click into what's happening in the buyer's mind and
Mm.
say, okay, it turns out we're pitching something that's a little too big. And if we describe it slightly differently, they should see it as something they can just swap out for something they're currently doing, a little tool, like a quick API call for what they're currently doing. Let's give that a try for the next 5 sales calls and see what happens. And we just kind of keep going through that. And as we kind of get more customers in, we keep iterating towards something that's repeatable and like works and has real pull.
Yeah. And that process, right? When we think about working with coaches, sometimes and I think this is what I'm taking away from what you shared just now, is that the outside perspective can really help, right? Like just sometimes when you're on the inside of a company, it can be harder to see some of those blind spots, or to, we're all approaching all of this with different biases, right? I think in our experience. And so it probably takes a certain kind of founder actually, right? To be like, oh, I really want to invite Robin to help me dissect this, right? Like are you mainly working with founders that have been at it for a while and therefore maybe have had a little bit of humble pie in terms of like trying to figure their thing out? Like what's your sense of the right founder to work with in your coaching?
Yeah, hey, I usually work with people who have paid in enough blood that like they're like, all right, cool, let's that I can't stoop any lower at this point, so why not try it? And then we kind of like get them unstuck pretty quick. The other is a lot of VCs, they write a pre-seed or seed check and they're like, all right, I'm not going to like require this as a condition of investment, but you really like need to go and do this. And so people do kind of in that way. I'll give you one, like, can I give you a testimonial for coaching as like as a thing that I recommend?
Please.
I'm bootstrapping a startup. I can't do this for myself in my own startup. I need somebody else to look at my sales calls and help me untangle them. And so if there is any testimonial like that's a reason, and it is that kind of like person who's not in it, who doesn't have the kind of massive list of, and they can just see what's happening. It's really helpful.
Yeah. Are you using Gong for these from a tool perspective, or just Zoom or anything, any recording? Doesn't matter.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. I use one called Fathom. It's free.
Oh, Fathom. Yeah, Fathom's great. And then do you think that AI is something that will be able to help distill this, or there's still like a human element of being able to like catch the flicker in the eye of the person that you're talking to, or see the smirk or like the slight hesitation? Because, I feel like there's a lot of innovators out there right now trying to say, oh, well, then we can just like build, AI tools to do discovery. Right. And I'm like, I think there is still a little bit of this human observation and intuition component there. I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be awesome if I could just have an AI. I could just like ask an AI, hey, do some deep research on all of my discovery calls and help me find product market fit. Not ruling it out, but it usually is in the thing they're not saying, or in the thing that they stop themselves from saying, is where the hints are. And so I'm gonna say it's like nuance. I don't foresee me being out of a job, is what I will say. As even if AGI comes, right? So
yeah, exactly. I think that gets to this point that I've spoken to founders who expect like discovery to be this, well, we'll ask the question and then we'll learn the answer. But there's so much that's derivative, or you're connecting this dot with this dot hidden under here that, it comes together a little bit. Like this process is not like linear, right? In terms of the discovery. And I think there are a lot of salespeople that are using Gong or using Fathom transcripts in AI in order to do some level of pattern matching. But I imagine, that there's that human piece of it that's still really important to observe and learn from.
Yeah, and see what's not being said, right?
Yeah.
And try to get underneath the things that you didn't know you should have asked, right? Like those are the hard ones.
So what does it feel like then when you get product market fit?
Yeah. It's for about 40 seconds, it's amazing. And then it is a different kind of pain. And so what it feels like, I think Mark Andreessen wrote this like in 2007 or whatever, where it's like it goes from feeling like you are pushing to feeling like the market is pulling product out of you, pulling the business into existence. And so what that actually feels like is your volume of support requests are going sky high as people actually need what you're building. Like everything in the business is breaking pretty much sequentially, right? Like one bottleneck at a time, and you've got to either throw people at stuff or automate things. It becomes a very hard prioritization exercise of which fires are worth putting out.
Sorry, this is just kind of jumping back to something you were saying before. When you were talking about the example with the nonprofit CRM and, replacing a whole CRM is very risky, high risk, big project. And then you had this idea of, or you discovered through observing phone calls that it was this reporting capability that could unlock fundraising, right, for them. I think it's probably magical as a founder to come across that nugget, right? Of, oh, okay, this is the real pain problem here. How could I solve that in a way that's going to have a lot less friction, right? For selling that and integrating that in for this company. Do you find that a lot of times that in working with founders, that's what happens, where founders have this idea of there's a category of something and I'm going to be the next best version of that category, right? Versus they're being underserved in this very specific way, right? And in the same way and I'm just kind of pattern matching, a lot of founders will say, oh, here's my TAM, it's this big. And then the question is really like, okay, what's the small pond that you're going to be a big fish in first? And then we can figure out how to expand on that. And is it the same with scope? Like, we think we're going to build this huge thing and that this is why we should get this many zeros on our fundraising check, et cetera. But really it's like, okay, we need to find something really acute. Is that a pattern that you've observed or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I'll say like usually I do see a lot of overbuilding, and that happens usually before they get to me because they have they've done general market research, they've done kind of general discovery, found pain points with existing systems, they've done a market mapping and architecture diagram and said, you know what, if there was an all-in-one one that did all of it, it would solve a lot of the friction in the industry, right? And it's awesome. And then they go and try to sell it and just get blank stares. And so usually when you find something that works, it is something like that. It's a reframe of what you're offering, and it's often a sliver of it or just a vector of what you're offering. Or what you kind of had as a theory of it's the starting point, right? You can start there, and there's always infinite ways to expand once you find your kind of starting point in a market.
Right. So by vector, like maybe you mean a certain module or a certain industry or like a certain type of buyer, like a role that's very unique, and finding that angle that's repeatable is more important than being the broad solution for everybody.
Yes.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times I've had conversations with people who 2 years ago raised on the theory that AI something all in one, and like that's the theory, and it's just people have to have a reason to buy something. And all-in-one is not a reason to buy something. They have to be trying to accomplish something they can't currently accomplish.
Right. Okay. Well, if only we could have an oracle that would show us the to-do lists of everybody.
I have. You don't know how much I've thought about that.
I mean, what are the tips and tricks for finding those to-dos, right? Like, yes, you have to have a hypothesis around your like bullseye customer, your ICP, your target customer, and then just like be able to like get in a room with them or get on the same side of the table with them and be like, yeah, so before we jump in, what's top of mind for you guys? Like, what are you trying to get done now?
Yeah, even before that, I know a friend's company, he like literally went in person to the offices of his potential customers and just watched.
Yeah.
And just like watched and why are you doing that? What is that? And then like got their P&Ls and looked at their P&Ls. I was like, why are you spending money on this? What is that? And like, it was through that he figured out what the kind of repeatable project was. And then he jumped on a bunch of calls to like validate it after that.
That's it. I mean, I guess that's an interesting question. And that person, they had a hypothesis going in though, of like, this is the problem space and they just needed to hone in deeper, or like, I guess
they had a hypothesis. The hypothesis was totally wrong. Entire business changed when looked at P&L and saw, you're spending this much on this. Can we talk about that a little more? Like, why?
Yeah. And so then I think that's so interesting, right? The hypothesis is wrong, and it's through just the real world observation that they're able to reform that. And, the best sales conversations that are collaborative, same side of the table, let me help you solve your problems is the best way to do that discovery. Yeah. That's as simple as that. No.
Hard to do, simple to describe.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about how people can work with you, or you're a founder, but also you've got this new position at Harvard Innovation Labs. How are people working with you today, and where can people follow you?
Yeah, so I am on LinkedIn and Substack. So LinkedIn, R Snyder 1. Substack is howtogrow.substack.com. All free there. My business website is findingpole.com. And I run quarterly boot camps, and founders kind of tend to sign up for those, reach out to me, and we chat to see if it's a fit. And so, and then that's basically it.
Are you also lecturing at Harvard or doing any coursework there as well?
Yeah, so I do usually like a quarterly workshop at Harvard focused on how to sell this way, how to find out what customers want, how to very quickly go from hypothesis to like sales conversations. And I just finished a book on this.
Oh, great. That's exciting. When will that be coming out?
According to my publisher, next year. So don't hold your breath.
I think that's wonderful. The approach for me, and I swim in all this content, right, was fresh and really helpful and thought-provoking. Thank you so much for spending some time with us today and sharing. And I know that you traditionally don't work specifically with product managers, and we are a product management podcast, but these are absolutely concepts and skills that I think the product leaders and innovators of tomorrow need to be leaning into and understanding. This is where the innovation happens. This is where the research meets the strategy, right? Of course, you have to be able to execute, but this is just filled with some really great nuggets and helpful guidance. So thank you so much, Rob.
Yeah, hope it's helpful. Thank you so much.
This podcast is an original production of Women in Product. Follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or the Women in Product YouTube channel. Leave us a review so that others can discover us, or share this episode with someone you know. Original music provided by Jimmy Hahn. Thanks for joining us.